Welcome to the VetFarm Network Podcast, where military veterans and their families explore how to build profitable, successful, and rewarding lives in agriculture. Today's guest is Tom Shea, Resource Manager for the North Central Region with the National Grazing Lands Coalition. Tom brings hands-on experience with cattle, sheep, and goats, along with a strong background in grazing systems and land stewardship. We'll be talking about grazing fundamentals, getting started with your livestock, and what healthy pasture-based systems can look like for new and beginning farmers. We'll also share a quick reminder about the Veterans in Farming State Meeting, which is coming up March in Indianapolis. This event is open to everyone. You don't need to be a veteran to attend. More details available at vetsinfarming.com. Let's get started with Tom Shea. Thanks so much for joining us, Tom. I'm really excited to learn more about the National Grazing Lands Coalition. For listeners who might not be familiar, can you explain what the National Grazing Lands Coalition does and how its work supports the health and management of grazing lands, both private and public?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast. So the National Grazing Lands Coalition, NatGLC for short, is a nationwide nonprofit that's dedicated to the assistance of grazing lands, both public and private. Our goal is to keep grazing lands working, so those areas that are supposed to be grass, still be managed as grass, which you need livestock to do that. And one of the ways that we do that is we have 23 state grazing coalitions, and one of those includes a Indigenous Peoples grazing coalition. So we have coalitions across the entire country, largely focused in the Midwest or the central region of the U.S., but we span from Florida to California and to Hawaii. And the way that we manage that is we have four regional managers. I'm one of them myself. And then we have three others who are Troy Bishop, Chris Workman, and Kendra Young. And they provide local expertise to their region. And we also have 13 partner organizations that help us guide our goal by having board members. And all of our board members are producers themselves. And that's one of the ways that we make sure that we stay producer focused and producer driven. Because we have a relatively small staff, we do most of our work through education. So, speaking at events and conferences to help educate farmers and ranchers that are just starting out to those that have been doing it their whole lives.
And so how did you get started working with this organization? What were you doing before you started this role?
Yeah, so previously, kind of going into my background a little bit, I've worked as a livestock manager in both South Dakota, Minnesota, and North Carolina. And prior to my job with National Grazing Lands, I worked as an extension agent in North Carolina, which kind of helped me pull together that real world experience that I got, but also the ability to help with the education aspect, which is what I learned heavily when I was working with the extension service. And then kind of saw this opportunity come up and worked as the education and outreach coordinator for Nat GLC for a little bit, and then was able to move up into this regional position.
So for a new or beginning farmer that might just be getting livestock, how would they connect with your organization?
Yeah, one of the easiest ways to find us, kind of like everybody else these days, we're on Facebook and Instagram as the National Grazing Lands Coalition. And then our webpage is grazinglands.org. So super easy, kind of, just be able to type that into your web browser and you can find us. And that has an About Us page and where to reach all of our different regional managers.
And you guys have a great YouTube channel as well with some of your, webinars recorded and just some great resources with AMP grazing and I don't know, just some sort of in-depth bios with some of the farmers and ranchers that you've worked with that are pretty interesting and pretty inspirational. Um, for new and beginning farmers that are sort of considering livestock, maybe they've been to one of our veterans in farming events and they're ready to, start getting some sheep or cattle. What are the key things that you encourage people to think through when they're deciding between cattle and sheep?
Yeah. So, even going back to just getting started, highly recommend people take a year or two of just doing research about the different livestock species that they're interested in. And then really, really recommend that they go to field days and get some hands-on experience, and then maybe even do an internship type thing with a local farm, so that they understand kind of what you're getting into. Farming is a dream for a lot of people, and the reality of it is really great, but it can get overwhelming really quickly if you're not prepared for what's kind of coming at you. So in order to do that, learn as much as you can, go to local field days, spend time with that. But when you're looking at cattle versus sheep, understanding what your resources is going to be critical. Whether you're going to be able to have a working chute right off the bat for cattle. Cattle are hard to handle. Um, they're large. They can be, you can't just hold on to them like you can a sheep. The number of acres that you're working with is going to be critical to your profitability. So, depending on where you are in the United States, cattle take up a lot of space because they eat a lot of grass, and where sheep eat a lot less grass, you can have anywhere between 4 and 10 sheep for every cow that you have at a little bit higher price per pound, and it comes very close to the same poundage, but you have a little bit better opportunity to make some profit on that. But then also looking at how much hay storage do you have? One of the things that's going to make the difference between profitability is how much hay you're feeding, and you can mitigate that by your grazing management. In my opinion, sheep are a little easier to handle as a new and beginning farmer, and kind of have a little bit of a higher learning curve as well as far as the health side of things go, but are a lot easier to handle, and especially on small acreage, you're going to have a little bit easier time and have, in theory, a higher profit margin because you can raise more of them at a little bit higher price per pound. But a large part of that is the sheep market can be tricky, so it's nice to have a relatively large metropolitan area within a couple of hours to try a direct market to the people in the city.
And so, from your experience, what should a beginning farmer kind of think about in the way of what does a sustainable or profitable grazing system look like from for the first couple of years? I mean, it's not going to necessarily be financially profitable year one or year two, but what are some things that they should, keep in mind and kind of pat themselves on the back with what are they doing right um, those first couple of years when they're just getting started and getting their herd up to size?
Yeah, start small, make build in a learning curve. If you are, sheep, for example, if you're getting started out, don't get more than 10. And then kind of learn how to manage those. And, if you're managing them and you can graze even 80 days that first year, I think you're probably off to a good start, especially if you're on new land. um, the more hay that you're going to end up feeding, the less profitability you're going to have. But being realistic, you're probably not going to be profitable for the first several years anyway. Profitability in that situation comes from um, those first couple years comes from just enjoying what you're doing and being out on the land. So you know, one of the things to pat yourself on the back for is, making sure that you're maintaining all your animals, making sure that they're happy and healthy. And, you know, forward progress in agriculture is always a win, is always a form of profitability, in my opinion. And that, you know, the ability to start transforming land from maybe something that hasn't been used for agriculture before, or has been kind of depleted, and start rejuvenating it is a huge profitability aspect as well.
I love that. And do you have anything coming up on your, event radar in the next 6 months or year, that event that you're going to be at that you're excited about that you would, recommend people going to or tuning in for?
Yeah, actually, one of the things that we're doing at our regional levels for Nat GLC is each of our regional managers is hosting a 2-day field day in their region. So Chris Workman, who's our Southeast regional manager, is hosting a post-Helene re- pasture revitalization and adaptive grazing strategies in Asheville, North Carolina, in June. And then Troy Bishop, who is our Northeastern regional manager, is hosting what he's calling the Ultimate Grazing School in September along the New York and Pennsylvania border. Really focusing on that new and beginning farmer of like practical, impactful grazing strategies, kind of the think before and after grazing techniques, and kind of diving into the using grass as a solar panel and making sure that you can improve the soil and your bottom line at the same time. And that's going to be a fun one because it's focused on both beef cattle and sheep. I'm running in a flurd, which is a flock and herd combined.
Oh, that's
And then
awesome.
yeah, so I'm really excited about that one. I'll actually be speaking at that one on the sheep and goat side, and there'll be grazing demonstrations and everything there. Um, and
Nice.
then, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, and so what would a field day kind of look like if someone hasn't ever been to a field day before?
Yeah. So the field days are we're gonna start in the classroom, at least for mine. So I'll go into what I want to do in the central region real quick because that's the one I can speak the most educatedly on. Is we're gonna do your grazing toolbox, which is kind of going to focus on all of the different tools that are out there that maybe farmers and ranchers or those that are new in the beginning might not think about as tools right off the bat. So looking at grazing versus browsing, fire management, different types of fencing, stuff like that. But what that's going to look like is we're going to be just outside of Manhattan, Kansas, and we are going to start off each day in the field and kind of look at. We're going to do a producer visit, talk about what they're doing with their virtual callers and ask questions kind of round robin and really see what's going on. And then go into the classroom that in the afternoon when it gets a little warm and kind of do a presentation style situation. Um, and then we're going to repeat that for the second day, kind of do, we're going to look at bison grazing versus cattle grazing versus browsing, which is what sheep and or what goats do, and kind of go into the classroom in the afternoon about what fire and how to manage woody encroachment. So not as hands on as some of the other field days that I'll host because I also help manage a small ruminant association, and those field days are completely hands on. Those are typically in North Carolina. But that's a lot of the next one that we have coming up is March 14th, just outside of Fayetteville, North Carolina. But that's going to be kind of from breeding to late gestation. How do you manage pregnancy in sheep and goats? And our goal is the farm that we're doing it is going to be lambing at that point, and we're hoping to really get hands on with helping with the lambing process, and then how do you manage the lamb after it's out? What kind of healthcare does it need? What kind of milk is it looking at? But that's going to be 4 hours of just hands-on stuff. So I think field days range from anything from standing out in the field and exchanging ideas to really getting your hands dirty and learning the most. And I think going to a variety of both types is really important.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I've always found hands-on experiences like that are worth their weight in gold, and it's always hard to get off the farm and go to those things, but afterwards yeah, you meet a lot of great people that are good future resources, and it just kind of lights the fire underneath you, to keep doing a better job, and you always take home something that you can put to use, and man, that is invaluable on a farm to get more and more efficient. uh,
Yeah, I think that's so important. One of the things that I just did recently, I was able to speak at the NCBA's Cattle Con about mentorship, and those opportunities are so important for finding mentorship opportunities.
Absolutely. And yeah, before we close out, I wanted to go down the rabbit hole quickly of the the collars that are sort of coming on the market.
Yeah.
How are you seeing them being used, and sort of are there any, pros and cons? I mean, besides, I know they're a little bit expensive to purchase, but for, amp grazing styles, it's kind of a really fascinating tool, and I'm seeing more and more of, my farmer friends adopting them on their, sort of smallish herds, under 50 cattle, and yeah, just wondering what you think about them.
Yeah, I'm super excited about virtual collars. So one of the things that my wife and I do is that we had a partnership in a flock here in North Carolina, and we managed it remotely through folks and that a lot of map drawing. So we're excited to we're getting back to the Midwest pretty coming up pretty quickly. So we're excited to be able to do that again, but using virtual collars to do more hands-on with some of our remote stuff. Because ourselves we're new, or what you most people consider new and beginning farmers. We're first generation. So we don't own land. We either lease or we work with friends to do that. So that those collars give us the opportunity to actually manage our flock the way that we want to. Um, and I think the other side of that is I talk to people, especially in kind of more hilly areas, that they're able to graze places that they've never been able to graze with grazing management before because putting up fence was just too difficult. And it's changing the landscape for the better. I think this is something. I think virtual collars are probably the future of rotational grazing or amp grazing, depending on your terminology.
And do you find that you generally do need to still have a perimeter fencing, and then this sort of is the, this like sub fencing in between, or for smaller paddocks, or can you just omit the exterior fencing around the whole property?
Yeah, I think best practice is always having that fail safe. Technology fails us. Wood and metals that's permanent is less likely to fail us. So I don't think it completely removes fences from the situation. Um, but I think it could remove internal fencing, which I think is a huge cost, especially when you're getting into amp grazing. Your perimeter fence is expensive enough, let alone trying to put up fences in between your paddocks to get that rotation going. And that kind of goes back to what some of the issues are with the virtual collars.
Hmm.
They're battery powered. Um, Batteries die. Um, so you don't want your animals walking towards the highway,
Right.
um, which has happened to me before, not with collars, but because someone left the gate open and then you end up getting pulled over for doing a ridiculous amount of speed trying to get back to the farm. But if you explain that to the cops, they're usually, if you ask them to come help, they're usually like, okay, just drive safe. But you just you don't want that situation if you don't have that permanent fence. You're more likely to get in that situation no matter, these callers are 99%,
Right.
retainment rate, but that 1% would be an issue without a permanent fence.
Yep. Yep. And with the price of cattle today, you don't really want to lose even
Yeah,
more.
exactly.
Well, I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing your experience and information about your organization. It's definitely a resource that I hope a lot of our VIF members take advantage of and look into, and I hope that they join some of your field days. And I just want to remind folks that this episode of the Vet Farm Network podcast is brought to you by Addie's Orchard, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting military veterans and their family through meaningful agricultural opportunities. To learn more about veterans in farming, including the Indiana State Meeting in March, please reach out at vetsinfarming.com. You can also find us on Facebook. So thanks for listening, and until next time, farm on.